José, ¿jugamos? Sí, pares. 1, 2 y 3. Sí sé. Kaká. Vidal. Beckham. Defoe. Kahn. Lampard. Beckenbauer.
So, listen to this. These days it's always Ronaldo, Messi. Kids are always like, oh, tell me another player who has won 3 consecutive Champions League titles. Well, Franz Beckenbauer. Tell me another player who has completed football. Messi has won everything there is to win. Again, Franz Beckenbauer. This man was the original serial winner. He was the first ever player to complete football. Back then, they might as well have put his name on the team sheets for every final before the season even started, because you may dread it, run from it, but destiny arrives all the same. I mean, he literally reached the final of every international tournament he played in, except one. In 1970, they resorted to physically breaking him apart in order to stop him, and even then, he refused to leave the pitch, carried on with his arm on a sling, and still finished third and took a medal home. That alone is enough to overshadow the legacies of damn near every footballer you can name, but the funny thing is that it does not even begin to cover everything that he has done. Even if you put his World Cup and his 3 European Cups to the side, he also won 2 Ballon d'Ors, 12 other titles with Bayern, the Euros with Germany, and then he left for the USA, won that league 3 times, came back, won the Bundesliga with Hamburg, retired, realized he could not live without football, took over as manager of the national team, reached the final of both World Cups they took part in, won another one, then decided to become a club manager, took Marseille to the final of the Champions League, moved on to Bayern, and again took not just a league title but also a UEFA Cup, eventually taking over as president of the club and leading them to another 23 titles over 13 years. I don't even need to try to make him sound great. It just was, and we lost him this week. And I know you may think you already know all you need about him, but you don't. It's not about the titles and awards, it's about the stories, his club, his teammates, the people around him, his country. He changed everything for them. Now you see Bayern and Germany as these football titans, but back then, that wasn't the case. As Beckenbauer himself once said, I was there when football was made into what it is today. When I was born, the country was on its knees. The only good thing was that there was no jealousy, because no one had anything. You see, he was born only 4 months after the end of the Second World War, and by then, the city had been made into rubble and ash. The Nazis had made it their biggest stronghold, and the Allied bombers did not spare them one bit. In fact, no one cared. The entire world hated Germany. And as their people tried to hold on to football in a desperate attempt to feel a drop of pride for their country, even that was pointless because Hitler himself had taken it away from them. He feared the sport's rebellious nature, and in his repeated attempts to control it, he almost killed it. And unlike what you might have heard, Bayern themselves were in fact some of the biggest victims. When Hitler took over as chancellor, Bayern had just won their first ever title. They were the reigning champions, but their president, Kurt Landauer, was Jewish, and so was the coach and some of the players. They were literally known as the Juden Club, and Hitler obviously could not have this, so he sent the president's entire family to a concentration camp. Eventually, thanks to his military service in World War I, they spared them, but his family suffered a different fate, and while he fled the country, Hitler tried his hardest to force Landauer's beloved club into submission. First he appointed one of his men as president, then he made them wear that badge we have all seen as a way to shame them. At one point, he even demanded the club hand over all of their silverware so it could be molten and used in the war. It was an incredibly dark time, and even once Landauer managed to get back to the club, even after a decade of trying to save it, by 1963, not only were they close to bankruptcy, they weren't even the biggest club in Munich. And once the Bundesliga was created, they weren't even included. The only thing that saved them was, ironically, a young fan of their rivals 1860 Munich. I'm talking about Franz Beckenbauer. In the 1954 World Cup, West Germany lost 8-3 against Puskás mighty Hungary in the group stage. It was incredibly embarrassing, but 14 days later they met again after Germany somehow made it to the final. Still, only 8 minutes into the match, they were already losing 2-0, but regardless, a young Beckenbauer sat completely still watching the remaining 82 minutes of that match in the television. By the end, West Germany had miraculously completed the comeback, and Franz had decided that no matter how much his own father despised football, he would become the next captain of the German national team. He was only 8 years old at the time. Nevertheless, by the age of 14, 6 years later, he was ready to join 1860's academy, but first, he had one last tournament to play with his old club, and ironically, once he reached the final, he was forced to face precisely 1860 Munich. It should have been a completely unremarkable match, but then Beckenbauer got into a confrontation with one of the 1860's players and got slapped in the face. From that moment on, not only did he decide that he would never play for 1860 in his life, but he decided to play for Bayern instead, setting off one of the greatest butterfly effects in the history of the sport. As the kid who slapped him would say in an interview 50 years later, "He must be happy that I slapped him. It was a matter of destiny that he became a Red." And that was real. It really did seem like it was meant to be. The moment Bayern was left out of the Bundesliga and completely penniless, they had no choice but to go looking in their academy, and Beckenbauer was already there, waiting for them, ready to transform the club. By the end of their first full season together, he had already dragged them back to the top tier, scoring 17 goals in 31 matches while playing deep in midfield, and at the start of the following season, he was already getting called up for the national team. It was uncanny how effortless it all seemed for him. In fact, that almost worked against him. As I once read, Beckenbauer never seemed to sweat. He floated through games. Every one of his passes would find a teammate. He made it all look easy. Too easy. Football was seen as a game of hard work, not artistry, and the German fans did not appreciate how often he defied that notion. And I mean, to be fair, their aversion to Beckenbauer was also in great part due to the fact that he had almost been banned from the national team after refusing to marry his then pregnant girlfriend, which at the time was incredibly controversial. But regardless, it is a fact that many were against that initial call-up, and even once he shocked the country by leading Bayern to the German Cup title, only their third ever trophy in only his second full season there, the press was still against his inclusion in the 1966 World Cup team, even though the manager himself justified it all by simply stating that there was no one better. And guess what? He was goddamn right. 4 matches into the tournament, he had somehow already scored 3 goals, and even once they had to face the Soviet Union in the semi-finals, a 20-year-old Beckenbauer scored the winning goal through an absolute stunner that left Lev Yashin, who was considered the greatest goalkeeper of all time, completely stuck to the ground. By the time they arrived at the final, many already considered him the star of the tournament, and there was no greater testament to that than the fact that he was the one chosen to man-mark Bobby Charlton. Except perhaps that Charlton himself was chosen to man-mark Beckenbauer as well. Eventually, even admitting that, by then, I knew there was no point in trying to face him. It was just a waste of time. However, even with Charlton out of the game, England were not only the favorites but also lucky enough to get maybe the most controversial goal of the century, and after extra time, the German dream was over. No matter what, Beckenbauer was still named in the team of the tournament as well as its best young player, and soon after, despite still earning only £100 a match and working a job on the side selling insurance, AC Milan came for him with a bid of £200,000 that would get him within inches of breaking the all-time transfer record, and still, he chose to stay at Bayern. By the end of the year, he was third in the Ballon d'Or, and by the end of the season, he had not just won another German Cup, but had also taken the Cup Winners' Cup, leading a newspaper to claim that he was already on his way to becoming one of the greatest players the game had ever produced. But it was what happened next that made that possibility into a reality. Over the next 3 years, Beckenbauer slowly began changing his game, dropping deeper and deeper, and slowly taking on the role that made him famous, the libero, going from being an amazing player to becoming one of a kind, finally allowing him to fully restore Bayern's place at the top of German football after 36 years, taking the Bundesliga title and even earning his famous nickname. As the story goes, Reinhard Buddha, known as the King, repeatedly tried to nutmeg Beckenbauer, so he completely ran him over, leading the away crowd to lose their minds shouting insults at him, to which he took the ball, walked towards them, and began juggling it in front of them as if he didn't even see them. The next day, the newspapers had decided, if Buddha was king, then Beckenbauer was their Kaiser. And of course, once the next World Cup arrived, the Emperor was their main man, and by the quarterfinals, tensions were already at all-time highs. It was Germany versus England again, and 1 hour into the match, Germany was 2 goals behind already. And as it all seemed hopeless, it was of course Beckenbauer who pulled a goal out of thin air to start one of the greatest comebacks of all time and get his revenge on England. And still, the drama in this match didn't even come close to the next. That one literally became known as the game of the century. Before Germany even had time to breathe, Italy was already in front, and 70 minutes later, still behind and with no substitutions left, Beckenbauer dislocated his shoulder. Anyone would have accepted defeat and gone into the locker room for treatment, but instead, he got the paramedics to come over, strapped his arm against his body with a bandage, hand on top of the German badge, and carried on. And even once Germany miraculously tied the match with 1 minute to go, he did not even think of abandoning the match. He endured 30 more minutes of physical and psychological torture, watching Germany go in front, lose their lead, tie the match back up again, and ultimately fall short regardless. As Geoff Hurst would say, that day, Beckenbauer showed that he could play as well with 1 arm as most players could with 2. It was one of the greatest examples of unwavering determination in the history of sports. Once the tournament ended, all senior players agreed at 24 years of age, Beckenbauer deserved the armband more than any of them. As Rummenigge would say, I've never once heard someone criticize him in my life, neither on the pitch or off of it. His reputation was untouchable. But still, at this point, he didn't have much silverware to his name, so starting in 1972, he changed that. First things first, together with his eternal partners Sepp Maier and Gerd Müller, he took back the Bundesliga title. Then, he joined the national team for the Euros, and in what was his first ever tournament as captain, they defeated the Soviet Union in the final to take the trophy. And by the end of the year, having already made it to the top 5 multiple times, Beckenbauer finally won the Ballon d'Or, edging Müller by only 2 votes to become the first ever defender to take football's greatest award. But regardless, this was only the first year of his incredible run and far from the best. By 1974, not only had he led Bayern to their 3rd Bundesliga title in a row, something no other team in Germany had ever managed to do, but then, that same season, he led them to the European Cup final, and again, it was an absolute blockbuster. In fact, it took them until the 120th minute before they managed to tie the score and force Atletico into a rematch. They had pushed themselves so hard in order to get that goal that according to Juva Zilla, the next day in training, we couldn't even walk, but somehow, we found strength, and once the replay came around, we played the best game in Bayern's history. Yeah, they demolished Atletico 4-0. Suddenly, in a matter of little more than 2 years, Beckenbauer had won every trophy in sight except one, the World Cup, and thankfully for him, he only had to wait 1 more month before he had another shot at it, but it wouldn't be as straightforward as he would have wished for. With the tournament being hosted in Germany, the players falling at odds with the federation itself and an imminent bomb threat, things got incredibly tense at their training camp. They were completely isolated from the outside world. There were guard dogs, security, motion alarms. They were like prisoners. As Beckenbauer himself would say, in Malenta, you go crazy. And to make it all worse, with most of their players having just won the European Cup with Bayern, the pressure to win was ridiculous. And once they lost their place at the top of the group to East Germany out of all nations, everyone lost their minds. And Beckenbauer knew that at that point, the only thing that could make up for that humiliation was bringing the trophy home. So he did the unimaginable. he gathered the entire squad and staff in the training grounds kitchen and pretty much took over as manager, singling out every player that underperformed and reshaping the entire lineup. Had any other player done that, and it would have been a locker room fiasco, but when Beckenbauer did it, everyone kept quiet, listened to him, and followed his words. Why? Because Beckenbauer never asked him for anything that he wouldn't do himself. As he one day said, "The wall in my old backyard was my most honest teammate. You play a proper pass, you get another back." That was all he asked for. And from there on out, they went the entire second round without a defeat, and then it was time for the final. West Germany versus the Netherlands. Between Beckenbauer and eternal glory stood only the world's most beloved team, the Mechanical Orange, the kings of total football, and Johan Cruyff. And of course, as always, 2 minutes in, they were already behind. But regardless, Beckenbauer held on to the memory of watching West Germany crawl back to defeat Hungary back when he was 8 years old, back when he had set out to make all of this possible, and with each and every duel, he took the supposed kings of total football head-on and put them in their place. 88 minutes later, West Germany were champions of the world, and at 28 years of age, Franz Beckenbauer had completed football. To this day, he is still the only defender to ever do that, and the only to do it while captaining their team in every competition. And still, that wasn't enough. Over the next 2 years, he would make sure to add 2 more European Cups to his name, making it 3 in a row, with everything culminating in 1976, when right after the last of those conquests, he joined the national team for one final tournament, bringing them to the final of the Euros once more, and only succumbing on penalties as Panenka made his name into a legend. And still, that did not stop Beckenbauer from winning yet another Ballon d'Or. Still to this day, he is the only defender to have won it twice. In fact, only 2 other defenders have ever won it, so if you want to put it that way, I guess you could say he has as many awards as every other defender in history put together. And had he been taken better care of, maybe he would have gone even further, but instead, he was pretty much forced to leave to the USA and retire from the national team. As he said, "I had problems at the club, I had problems in my personal life, I had problems with the taxman. Sometimes things just come at you all at the same time, so I said goodbye to everyone and left for New York." And when it comes to what happened next, well, you just can't fit a giant into 15 minutes.